Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Tuesday, March the 26th, 2024. Yesterday I looked at the attack on the Crocus City Hall in Krasnogorsk in Russia. And when I looked at this attack, there was a bit of an omission. I didn't consider the chart of Russia. And today I do want to consider Russia's horoscope. And this is a controversial issue because I'm sure that Russia has got many charts. I think a first possible chart for Russia goes back to the 9th century. The chart I want to look at today is the chart of the lowering of the hammer and sickle from the Kremlin and its replacement with the tricolour, with three horizontal stripes from top to bottom, white, blue and red. Now, there might be a problem to some people. Some people are quite legalistic. They say, well, did anything change when you just raise a flag? Perhaps there were things going on the day after, December the 26th. It's like some people say that we shouldn't be looking at July the 4th, 1776 as the beginning of the United States because nothing changed legally. The rebels could sign whatever documents they like, but Britain was still largely in control of the colonies, and one should be waiting until the early 1780s when Britain had lost its Revolutionary War. Likewise, with the French Revolution, should you be taking the storming of the Bastille as the beginning of France? Well, possibly not, because did anything change? Louis XVI was still king. But the thing is, it was even of enormous symbolic importance. The storming of the Bastille on July the 14th, 1789, was a massive date in European and French history. And so because of the great symbolism of the event and its power, I believe it becomes the real inception of France. Now, you might disagree with me. Likewise with the United States. Some people are claiming that you should be looking at a chart in the early 1780s. But really, from an inspirational perspective, the signing of the Declaration of Independence is really what matters. And that was on July the 4th, 1776. And likewise with Russia. We could say that that symbolic moment where you take down the hammer and sickle from the Kremlin is the beginning of it. And I accept there will be other charts to look at, but I'm going to be looking at this chart, December the 25th, 1991. I should say December the 25th has no particular relevance because it's only Christmas Day in the West. It's not Christmas Day in Russia. It's December the 25th is not the Orthodox Christmas Day. So I will be looking at this chart for Russia, and I'll be looking at some events, and I'll be asking a question, well, how well does this chart work? I also want to look at Russia in general, and I want to talk again about the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction at the end of 2020, which has, I think, such a big bearing on what's going on, not just in Russia, but in the world at large and in the collective unconscious. But before I do that, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Tuesday, March 26, 2024. There we have it, top right, Russian flag. And looking at this chart for today, I'm not saying that it's going to be a particularly exciting or dramatic day. The moon is in Libra. You can see it's at 21 Libra. It is moving into the Via Combusta. So the Via Combusta is the part of the sky between 15 Libra and 15 Scorpio. So the moon goes into the Via Combusta every month. So in a sense, it's just not a big deal. Still, we should be aware that the moon is in the Via Combusta now, and it will be for the next couple of days. When the moon is in the Via Combusta, things can just happen that we weren't really expecting. We make plans and something happens that wasn't part of our plans, and we find we have to completely change our plans and start all over again. So if we're making plans today and tomorrow, certainly maybe today through Wednesday, Thursday, up until up until the moon being at 15 Scorpio, we just have to have some flexibility in those plans. We must accept that things can change quickly. I think that is very important. Though the first part of the moon being in the Via Combusta, the part we're in now with the moon being in Libra, is not quite as disruptive as the second part when the moon is in Scorpio. And this moon in Libra is opposition Mercury in Aries. In fact, that's the main aspect today. Moon opposition Mercury. It's slightly problematic. Moon and Mercury are both communication planets. The moon is about sort of emotional communication, communicating from the heart. Mercury is more about cerebral communication, communicating from the head, from the brain. And when they're opposition each other, there can be communication issues. The words might not come out right, and we might find ourselves having differences of opinion with certain people. It's just the way it is. And it's not just about the exact aspect, it's just simply having moon in Libra, Mercury in Aries, and that's really what the day is about. There's not a lot else going on. As far as midpoints are concerned, the Sun continues to be conjunct the Mercury-Venus midpoint. So that does emphasize creativity, whether it's in terms of business or art, painting, writing. So make the most of that conjunction with the Sun being on the Mercury-Venus midpoint. It's around for quite a few days, so it's not just a one-day wonder. Also, the Sun is on the Neptune node midpoint. We can see that pretty clearly here. There's the Sun, there's the North Node, and there is Neptune. So with the Sun on the Neptune node midpoint, we may find our effect is somewhat dampened down by perhaps the people around us, the environment in which we're living. Neptune node, if we take the node not as being about karma, but being about our connections, and we take Neptune as being about dissolution and perhaps a little bit of chaos, then a chaotic environment can potentially bring us to a standstill. So that, I think, is something we do have to be very aware of. Another midpoint to consider is Saturn. Saturn is on the Mercury-Pluto midpoint. With Saturn on the Mercury-Pluto midpoint, we may feel that we really have something to say, but we don't quite know how to say it. Mercury-Pluto as a pair is about propaganda, perhaps, being manipulative, being persuasive, and Saturn on the Mercury-Pluto midpoint may be the struggle to be persuasive and manipulative. For most of us, it's going to be difficult, but we might also find that authority figures are trying to get us to believe something. Saturn perhaps being a representative of an authority figure, being symbolic of an authority figure. We therefore have to be careful who we listen to. People who have authority may be telling us to do things, to think things, to say things, and they may not be right. Why are they doing it? probably just to extend and perhaps confirm their power. We therefore have to be careful about what governments are telling us. If we're working in an organization, managers, senior figures will say things, and we shouldn't necessarily believe them. But it's going to be difficult for many of us to really express ourselves. We might want to do our own manipulating, and that could be hard work with Saturn on the Mercury-Pluto midpoint. And some of us might find with Saturn on the Mercury-Pluto midpoint that we just spend a day having angry, obsessed ideas, and we can't get them out into the open, and it's all rather difficult, but I think we just need to be patient. Looking at the day from a heliocentric perspective, and I am going to show you the chart for the heliocentric solar system. The Sun is at the center of the solar system, so I do think it is important to look at the chart of the heliocentric solar system, where you have the Sun in the middle of things, in the middle of everything, like it is here. So when you've got a heliocentric chart, you see that the Earth is in it. Earth is a circle with a cross on it. There's no point in putting the Moon there, because from the Sun's perspective, the Earth and the Moon are so close together that they are effectively the same place, and there is no ascendant. What we see in this heliocentric chart is Mercury opposition Mars. There you can see Mercury opposition Mars. Mercury at 11 Leo, Mars at 9 Aquarius. Now you might say, oh well, Mercury is 2 degrees beyond, 2.5 degrees beyond Mars. But this is a heliocentric chart. From a heliocentric perspective, Mercury can move, 6 degrees a day. So 2 degrees off the opposition to Mars is no big deal. We can certainly say that today is a heliocentric Mercury opposition Mars kind of day. And that perhaps ties in with Saturn being on the Mercury-Pluto midpoint. Angry communications, people having things to say, but not perhaps being able to say them in an entirely natural way. It's all a bit forced, because people are angry about things. And because this is a heliocentric chart, this may not be personal. Heliocentric charts are often about the collective, and the collective is angry about things, and the representatives of the collective are angry about things. Governments are angry about things. Perhaps people in authority are angry about things. And when you look at the world around you, there is a certain tension there that I think is quite unmistakable. But aside from that, I'm not saying that it's a particularly dramatic heliocentric chart. I think the main aspect is that Mercury opposition Mars. So let's go back to the regular chart, the geocentric chart with the Earth in the middle. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to look at the astrology for the 12 signs. Now, I should say before I start that there isn't a lot going on today. The main aspect is Moon opposition Mercury. And a lot of what I'm going to be doing is considering how that Moon opposition Mercury is going to be working. Because it's the main aspect, it's going to have more influence. There won't be other aspects kind of getting in its way. So it may be that my readings for the 12 signs are a little bit shorter than usual. Okay, these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Tuesday, March the 26th, 2024. Aries, you do seem to be a bit angry about something. Something is annoying you. and you want to tell the world how you feel. That is not surprising. Mercury is moving through Aries. So when Mercury is going through Aries, you're feeling quite agitated. The words are there, the thoughts are there, and you are looking for an opportunity to tell someone how you feel. I think you will be able to express yourself, but you really have to consider what impact you're going to have. Your impact might not be quite as you expect, and that will become clear the moment you start talking. The moment you start talking, you'll kind of feel that something isn't quite right, that the translation of how you feel to the actual words and how those words impact another person may not be perfect. And I think, Aries, there may be a danger that you do give the wrong impression. Perhaps you haven't thought about it properly. You might have used the wrong words, and the other person might not just get the wrong impression, but they might get annoyed about what you say. One or two words can cause a lot of damage. And there may also be a question about your subject matter. You might want to use particular subjects to illustrate a point, and your choice of subject matter might be unfortunate. Perhaps you're going to use imagery or describe events which are somewhat unpleasant, and that might not go down well. I would therefore ask you, Aries, to think again. Is it really important to say whatever you feel you have to say? Is there another way of going about it? And it may be what matters, Aries, is the actions rather than the words. Perhaps you shouldn't be tempted to just feel that, you have to say what's on your mind. It may be more about doing what's on your mind. And by acting and saying, perhaps at the same time, you are illustrating the point. So if you just use words on their own, then yes, you might create the wrong impression. But if you use words and actions together, then you're going to start making more sense. And the people you're communicating with are going to start to understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. And I think that is perhaps the way forward. I should also say, Aries, that now is not really the time to be considering public opinion or the opinions of the people around you. I know that's standard advice for any Aries, but Aries doesn't usually have a problem with this. I mean, Aries just goes and does it. At least the stereotypical Aries does. But I think Aries today, there may be a certain temptation to try too hard to please other people, which is completely out of line with your personality. But the temptation is there. And I do think that is a temptation that needs to be resisted. And this may actually tell us why your attempts to communicate might go wrong. The reason your attempts to communicate might go wrong is because you are actually trying too hard to make people happy. You feel you have to somehow explain yourself. And that's not Aries behavior. So by not trying too hard to make people happy, just by doing what you think is right, without worrying about public opinion, then I think you have the best possible chance of being effective. Taurus. you do feel that you want to kind of get away from things. Things are complicated. You feel that they all need to be properly organized. But you have to be careful how much organization you actually want to bring into your life. I understand you're a Taurus. Taurus is an earth sign. In many cases, you like certainty and structure. But your attempts to create certainty and structure for yourself may not actually go anywhere, and you may find yourself isolated and perhaps even embarrassed because you are tempted to kind of focus on the wrong things. You focus on details which are unimportant, and you put energy into these unimportant details, and you waste a lot of time, or you could even embarrass yourself. That would suggest that if you have your own concerns, quite obsessive concerns maybe, you should not be inflicting those concerns on other people, because I don't think other people are interested. Sure, there may be some basic organizational moves that you have to do, but you can't go on and on about them. You have to consider the wider picture. And at the same time, you need to be ready to handle a higher degree of disruption. The world is disruptive at the moment. There are things going on. The full moon that we had yesterday is still in action. And the full moon does bring a lot of toing and froing. Difficult to predict what's going to happen next. Remember also, the moon is moving into the Via Combusta. And as I said about the moon Via Combusta, it's a part of the sky that is disruptive. And you need to accept the disruption, and you need to accept the complications of that disruption. And you shouldn't overreact when things don't go entirely as you expect. And this is reflected by everyone you meet. Everyone you meet has the potential for disrupting your life in a very small way. And you certainly can't have expectations about anyone you meet. People can do things that were completely unplanned for. And you shouldn't be upset about it. You should just take the view, well, this is the way it is. Having said that, I don't think that you necessarily need to be meeting lots of different people. Allow yourself to drift off a little bit of distance between yourself and the rest of the world every now and then might be a very good thing. And if you feel that you need to take a rain check, take a step back, just do it. Don't apologize, don't explain, just do it. You can disappear for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, a couple of hours, if whatever's necessary, just so you can get your bearings back. So it's that kind of day. It's not an easy day. I mean, it needn't be a difficult day, provided you don't get hung up on stupid details, particularly social details. Don't be too concerned if someone behaves in a way you weren't expecting, and certainly don't take people to task. Don't criticize people for trivial mistakes, particularly trivial social mistakes. It's not important. And that really matters for you today. Get your priorities right and don't get obsessed by things that are unimportant. Gemini, you do have to consider your role in the world. You are connected to different people. You're part of things. You may be part of groups. You may be part of societies. I suppose if you happen to be working today, then you're part of a workforce perhaps, or you're part of a company. So consider today what you are part of, and also consider how you can make the most of that, how you can assert yourself properly. But it's not about doing things your own way. I'm afraid that today teamwork does matter. I understand that many Geminis are not team players. But I think today, I think you do have to consider that. And, if you get hung up on your own creative genius, I think I said this yesterday as well, if you get hung up on your own creative genius, no one's going to be very impressed. And in fact, if you think you can do things alone, if you think you can do something really amazing all by yourself, then I think you might be mistaken. You really do need to get some advice, and you also need to consider what's going on. A bit of reference to the social environment in which you're working in is essential. That does not mean, though, that you have no authority. There are things which you really know well, and it may be a time when you need to talk about these things with other people, but talk about them not in a way that is arrogant. You always must be open to the possibility that you haven't got all the answers. And some small observation that another person makes could really make all the difference. For example, if you feel that you understand how best to bring one of your skills out into the open, you might feel that you've got one particular talent and it's a special talent and you can really express it. You might think you really understand it. But by engaging with another person or a group of people, you might get some really important feedback. And this feedback, in the first instance, might be irritating. But if you go with it, you might be pleasantly surprised. You might be told something really important that allows you to fine-tune what you're doing. And this, in turn, could make you really very effective. Though I have to point out that the main aspect today is an opposition between the Moon and Mercury. Mercury is your ruler. When the Moon is opposition Mercury, there's just irritation. It's like you don't want to be there. You're just going to get that feeling. You're just not going to want to be there. And I think when you're talking to people, there'll be a haste to you. You'll give the impression, if you're not careful, that you just want to go as soon as that other person has shut up. And of course that is very disrespectful. But as Geminis, we often do it. Someone's talking to us, but our mind is going somewhere. Our mind is just going off somewhere else. And that's a danger today. Remember, I'm speaking as a Gemini. We're not properly listening. The other person is, they're trying to make a point to us. Maybe they're making important points, but we're not listening. At least we might not be listening if we're not careful. So I think it's really important to respect the people you're with today. Respect what they're saying and make a special effort to listen, and don't put yourself somewhere else. You are one place listening to someone, but your brain is already moving to the next place, and that means there's a complete lack of concentration. And when Geminis aren't concentrating, there can be big problems. Geminis can make mistakes, and most importantly, they can upset people. Someone is telling you something important, but you're not listening. You're not really listening. You even say, yes, you understand, and then you go on and you weren't listening. And you do something which clearly illustrates that you weren't listening, that you've shown zero respect for that person you've just been talking to. Perhaps a person who's just been lecturing you for some reason. So overall, Gemini, I think the key word today is respect. Cancer. You are still feeling the impact of a full moon. So there was a full moon yesterday. And this full moon is quite important. I said that this full moon, yesterday when I was talking about this full moon, Cancer, I was suggesting that this full moon should be really propelling you forward. It's about understanding your role and your duty and your obligations in wider society. You have something to contribute. It may be, but one of the things you've got to contribute is leadership. Cancerians make great leaders. Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, perhaps more controversially, Elon Musk. Okay, maybe Elon Musk is not a leader to everyone's taste. But today, with the aftermath of this full moon is still there. Remember, the sun is still in Aries, the moon is still in Libra, sun and moon are still in opposite signs, so you still have something very clear to contribute. But I think that when you are up there, people paying attention to you, you do it with a certain hesitancy. You feel almost that you'd rather be somewhere else. And I think that is connected with the moon, your ruler. Moon is a ruler of Cancer. Moon at the moment is in Libra. And from a Cancerian perspective, Libra is quite an introspective sign. It's a sign that wants to steer clear of the bright lights. And that's quite understandable. Cancerians always need to look after themselves. Security is very important to them. But you can take things too far. And I think today, Cancer, with the moon making a conjunction to the South Node, you may be rather too concerned with security. Yes, you've got to look after your security up to a certain point. But if you go too far in terms of trying to protect yourself, particularly on an emotional level, it might just seem a bit weird, because you would be then neglecting your responsibilities, because really you have got something important to contribute. And it's very important when you're with people, especially in a setting like your work, career, if you're running a business, in that kind of setting, it's very important that you don't allow subjective impressions to interfere with your decision making, because the moon is opposition Mercury. Mercury is in Aries, high profile sign from a Cancerian perspective. It should be a sign that is very logical, that is not motivated by deep emotional considerations. But the Mercury is opposition the moon, and so the moon, which is your ruler, could actually be unhelpful. The moon represents your feelings. It may even represent your past and your subjective interpretation of your past. And this stuff, this emotional stuff, could flow into your outer decision making, could flow into what you're saying to people. And as a result, you could trip yourself up. People may take the view that you're being over emotional. You're talking about things that are not relevant. Maybe, Cancer, you're allowing past impressions of particular people to influence your judgment, remembering that Cancerians don't forget. If someone has behaved badly in the past, they'll remember. They may not be into forgiving. But you should take the view to a certain extent of it's water under the bridge. Today it's a new day. It's Tuesday. We've had the full moon. You've got to be forward thinking, and you can't allow your feelings from the past to influence your words and your actions in the present. And I think that is the risk. But I'm not saying it's going to happen like that. Remember, the sun is in Aries. It's in a high-profile sector of your chart. The sun works very well in Aries. The sun is conjunct the North Node in Aries. And it will be for a few weeks. And so with the sun conjunct the North Node in Aries, this is a time of your life when you have the opportunity to really make things happen, to show leadership, and if there's something not right, for example, in your work, you can fix it through just taking the initiative and not looking back. Yes, I think that's the key point, Cancer. Don't look back. What was it? Was it Lot's wife? She looked back. In the Bible, was she looking back at, was it Sodom and Gomorrah or something, and she was turned into a pillar of salt? Isn't that what happened? Don't look back. Look forward, and then I think you're going to be okay. Leo, I said yesterday that the sun was conjunct the Mercury-Venus midpoint. Just a reminder, the sun is still on the Mercury-Venus midpoint. So just be artistic, be creative, don't apologize for being creative. You've got so many talents and got to keep using them. If you weren't able to get it together yesterday, then get it together today. I think that is really important. At the same time, you shouldn't allow trivial considerations to get you down or to interfere with what you're trying to achieve and indeed what you can achieve. Remembering that the main aspect today is Moon opposition Mercury. The moon is conjunct the South Node. The South Node is the line of least resistance. It's easy today to focus on the trivial. Focus on things that really don't matter. But you want to focus on things that don't matter because it's easy. Everyone wants an easy life, and certainly Leos want an easy life. And by focusing on trivia, you could be blinded by it, but happily blinded by it. Blinded by trivia. That is a danger. But it's an unnecessary danger. You need to focus on the wider picture. And you need to engage your brain on the wider picture. And not allow little details to upset you. You might, for example, be learning about a new subject. And as you learn about this new subject, you might immediately have doubts. You might think, no, this can't be right. That can't be right. I think I'm going to stay with what I know and trust. But what's happening there is you're perhaps knowing about something you don't fully understand. And at the beginning, when you feel lost, it's easier to retreat into your comfort zone. So you just need to keep moving intellectually and not ask too many questions to begin with. Just accept what you're being told, accept what you're learning. Later, the picture will become clearer. And I'm not really just talking about some subject that you might be studying, for example, at college, university, or whatever, or something you're studying on your own. I'm talking about a new way of thinking. Because I think, Leo, if you're doing things right, you should be exposing yourself to a new way of thinking and perhaps a new way of believing as well. And it's going to be important that you're open-minded. You're not going to be in a position to judge a set of beliefs until you get the full picture. And that will take time. And this relates maybe to some new philosophy, new religion, new way of seeing the world from a spiritual perspective. Though some Leos might be thinking about travel. After all, the sun at the moment is in Aries, and from a Leo perspective, Aries is a sign that is very connected with traveling, going to new places. Should you be making travel plans? Buying tickets? Well, not necessarily. I think the environment is important. I am concerned about greenhouse gases. What about the sea ice that's being melted when you take a flight? Carbon credits is just not good enough, is it? Mitigation. You're damaging the environment. Okay, I'm not saying you have to listen to me on this score, but the point I'm really trying to make is that travel does not necessarily require physical travel. Real travel that really elevates you, but doesn't need any physical movement at all. It's that travel in terms of the intellect. And you don't have to go to the other side of the world to expand your horizons. Indeed, didn't someone say that travel narrows the mind? The trouble with travel, I suppose, is that you go somewhere, perhaps for a few weeks, you think you're traveling the world, you want to see stuff, but all that happens if you visit a place for a few weeks is your prejudices just very often just get confirmed and strengthened. So that's perhaps another reason why physical travel should perhaps be avoided, because you don't want to just confirm your prejudices by going somewhere. You've already got an idea about what it's like, and you go there and you just see it from a perspective of a foreigner, particularly if it's just for a few weeks. But, I'm preaching a bit here, aren't I? What I'm trying to say is travel is important, but it's travel of the mind. Ideally, it should be travel of the mind, being inspired by something. And what you should not do is ask too many questions. Is this right? Should I be doing this? But this doesn't make sense here. Just wait. Allow yourself to expand your universe. It really is possible, especially now with the Sun conjunct North Node in Aries. So take advantage of this opportunity, because the Sun is not going to be in Aries forever. it moves into Taurus eventually, pretty soon. I don't know, 19th, 20th of April, something like that. And then you'll have to deal with a different set of challenges. Virgo. Today, Virgo, the moon makes an opposition aspect to Mercury. And from a Virgo perspective, I think that is important. After all, Mercury is your ruler. And so when the moon is opposition Mercury, there is irritation. And I think you may be tempted to focus on the wrong things. And this possibly relates to the material world. Because this opposition between the moon and Mercury takes place across the financial axis of your chart. The moon is in Libra. In the jargon, it's in the second house, connected with money and things. Mercury is in the 8th house, another financial house, but it's a house that's linked with sort of complicated money, joint finances, trying to understand what complicated numbers actually mean. And in terms of money today, I think that many Virgoans are going to want to keep it simple. It's easier to look at the day-to-day income, personal finances, all that kind of stuff, without wanting to really consider the deeper picture. So if you do find yourself today worrying about money or involved in money, you should not take what you see at face value. So if you're given a set of figures, don't just accept those figures and say, oh yeah, there are some numbers, I accept those numbers. You need to ask questions about where those figures come from. I suppose that might be quite trivial, like if you go to a grocery store and you get a long itemized bill, and you say, oh yeah, well, look at the bottom, that must be how much I owe. Not necessarily. It might be a day when it could actually be worthwhile checking the items on a grocery bill, making sure that you haven't been overcharged or double charged. And with Mercury in Aries, if you feel that something is wrong, not just about something not adding up on a grocery bill, but some other aspect of your financial life, if something is wrong, it's very important to let everyone know, or let the people who matter know. After all, Mercury is your ruler, and it is in Aries. And Aries likes to assert itself. It should assert itself. So don't feel embarrassed about making a fuss if something is not right. I'm thinking particularly about money, but it could be about anything. If something doesn't add up, then don't just take it at face value. Say, well, thinking, oh, well, maybe you made a mistake. Maybe the thing will sort itself out. No. If something doesn't add up, I think, Virgo, you have to make a fuss about it immediately. Libra. Moon is still in your sign. But the moon is conjunct the South Node in your sign. So what that might mean is that some of the more negative aspects of Libra may be trying to come to the surface. So what does that mean? well, Librans can be rather too quick to compromise because they want a happy life. They maybe want to negotiate, come to an agreement, just anything that prevents unpleasantness and fights and arguments, just anything to create balance and happiness. Well, I don't think that's necessarily the right approach, because if you try too hard to compromise, or perhaps you want to sweep things under the carpet, if you try too hard to do that, then you might actually create the opposite effect, because when there's compromise, no one's happy. At least that's how it might be today. You're not happy because you've given something up. Someone else is not happy because they've perhaps given up as well, something as well. And what perhaps needs to happen is that the issue needs to be brought out into the open. And I think that this is especially the case when you've got, like today, you've got Moon opposition Mercury. Moon opposition Mercury, which is across the main axis of your chart, it's quite a verbal opposition. And it's basically saying that you've got two people with 2 points of view, and those points of view cannot be reconciled. You could try to reconcile them. You might have a bit of success, but ultimately you've got two views of the world, and those views of the world can't be brought together, and you have to accept that. And as a Libran, I think that is difficult. And the challenge here for you is to deal with disagreement. That requires understanding and respect, for sure, but it also requires you to stand up for yourself. You stand up for yourself, but in such a way that you don't disrespect other people. It's a really hard balance, that. I understand that, but I think it's a balance that you can deal with. I'm really confident that you can manage it, and it's also important that you hear people out, because if you hear the first few words that someone says, you might jump to conclusions. Things might look really bad when you look at the beginning of someone's point. But when you hear the whole point, when you hear everything they've got to say, then you might be in a better position to understand and appreciate their point of view. And in a general sense, when you're going around the world, when you're meeting people, talking to people, don't make any assumptions, because right now there is a certain sense of instability. People want to express themselves perhaps in strange ways, in ways that you are not particularly used to, and you might find that a bit weird, unsettling, but you shouldn't be unsettled. What you're seeing is people's basic individuality, and if you can just accept that individuality, then in a way you're going to feel more comfortable. Allow people to be different, and allow them to express perhaps strange points of view, maybe even strange behavior patterns. It's the way it is, and with that acceptance there will be a certain sense of harmony, believe it or not. Scorpio, you're not quite ready. That's how it feels. You know that there is something that needs to be done, but you don't feel that now is quite the right time to do it. There's still pressure to do stuff. People might want your opinion on things. You might feel a certain obligation to do something, to go out of your way to meet someone. I would be inclined to resist that pressure, because I don't think there's a great deal you can do at the moment. And at the same time, some of your preoccupations may be a bit troublesome. Some Scorpios may be obsessed about things that are a bit unusual, that maybe represent the darker side of human existence. You'll be looking at the world, and many Scorpios may find themselves just interested in violence. By that I mean interested in other humans' capacity for violence. So as you're reading the news, watching TV, and you see violence reported, it's going to have perhaps more of an impact on you than usual. I mean, you understand that we live in a violent world. You, of all people, you understand that the world is not a nice place. And what you see will perhaps confirm this. But it may be something of a preoccupation. And perhaps you have to understand that not everyone is going to be as preoccupied by it as you are. Although I suppose in some cases there could be a sense of shock when you see how bad the world is. And that might be quite troubling for some Scorpios, particularly those Scorpios of a more humanitarian nature. So what kind of day should it be? It should be a day when everything is properly organized. You don't want any surprises. I do understand, though, that the moon is in the Vir Combustor. And it will be for a few days more. And in fact, it's going to get more intense when the moon goes into Scorpio tomorrow. The moon will certainly be in the Vir Combustor. But at least the moon will be in your sign. Right now, the moon is in the Vir Combustor, but it's not in your sign. So that suggests things happening which you hadn't planned for, which you don't feel you fully understand, and that you don't have a proper response. It's easy to respond in a way that is crazy. Maybe not crazy, but at least all over the place. So that's another reason why things have to be properly organized. Organization does matter, but it's active organization. It's not passive organization. I suppose there's a difference between active and passive organization. So passive organization means you are responding to what's going on around you by trying to put things together. Active organization is saying, I want the world to be like this. I want my world to be like this. This is what I'd like it to be. This is what it will be. And if anyone disagrees with me, that's their problem, it's not mine. So active organization is the way forward for today. You decide how things should be put together, and you articulate that, especially as Mercury is in Aries. Mercury is in Aries, and Aries, from a Scorpio perspective, is a sign that is connected with organization and structure. So think about this structure and be ready to argue for that structure, because not everyone is going to agree with you. But I think in this situation, your ideas about the way things should be organized are the correct ideas. So stand firm. Sagittarius, you would like to listen to people, be with people. Your social life is important to you. I said pretty much the same thing yesterday. But getting too hung up on your own social life can be a bit of a problem, because you can be pulled in ways that are just not to your taste, and as a result you can get really annoyed, especially today when the moon is opposition Mercury. So the moon opposition Mercury gives us the idea of having an argument, having a disagreement, or just feeling that you and someone else are just not on the right wavelength, especially as Mercury rules Gemini, and Gemini is your opposite sign. And so that is very suggestive that you and someone else are not going to agree with each other. And I think you need to accept that. If you are very clear about what you want to do, and you make it known that this is what you want to do, then you might be told that you're wrong, or that you should be doing something else, which is not desirable at all. You need to be thinking about yourself. You need to be thinking about what you can do, and you need to express yourself in such a way that you make it clear this is not a matter for argument. You have decided that you're going to exercise your talents in a way you feel is appropriate, and if other people have differences, differences of a different opinion, you are not going to compromise. Yes, that might lead to an argument. It might lead to a disagreement, but I think it would lead to quite a short disagreement. If, on the other hand, you were to say, well, I'm going to listen to you, I'm going to see what you have to say, and we're going to talk about it, and we're going to negotiate it, and maybe we can have a situation where I spend a bit of time doing what I want to do, a bit of time doing what you want me to do, that would be a recipe for disaster. I think that today you have to be clear all day long that you are going to do things your way, and I'm thinking particularly of the things you are good at. What are those things you are good at? Those things need to be exercised. It's not just that the sun is on the north node and the moon is on the south node. It is also the fact that the sun, which is moving through a very creative sector of your chart, is on the Mercury-Venus midpoint. Super creative there. And you don't want that moon opposition Mercury to spoil it. It's just so easy to spend time listening to people. But as soon as you spend time listening to people, as soon as you start considering the possibility that you might change your behavior because of what someone has told you, then you're in very dangerous territory. You start to be uncertain. You start to have to justify yourself. And from then on, things could go wrong very quickly. So for everyone's sake, Sagittarius, just be clear about what you want to do. And within reason, don't listen too hard to outside opinions. Capricorn, you continue to be quite persuasive. You really can make things happen, and you can make people believe things. This may or may not be a good thing. And the question you have to ask yourself is, how sure are you of your knowledge and your beliefs? Do you really know all the answers? If you do know all the answers, that's fine. You're quite entitled to express yourself, and you're quite entitled to be a bit manipulative. After all, if you really know the answers and you really are right, then of course you should be persuading the world that this is the case. But of course, if you don't know the answers, or if you don't think you know the answers, then you might be persuading people to think something that turns out to be incorrect. I would, under these circumstances, suggest that you give everything some thought, and you shouldn't feel pushed to be manipulative, because sometimes people are manipulative almost out of a lack of self-belief. I mean, if you don't fully believe something and you're a bit uncertain about something, then one approach to this as a defense mechanism might be to get other people to believe what you are actually uncertain about. So you're uncertain about something, so you think, well, if I can persuade someone, then surely that means I must be right after all. I wouldn't go down that road if I was you. If you have any uncertainty about something, if you're not 100% certain, then stop what you're doing and review the situation. And then things will clarify. It won't take long. Just maybe today. Today you can really work out if you know what you're talking about. Bit of research. Look something up on the internet. You don't have to be disturbed. Indeed, Capricorn, I think in many cases you're going to be on best form when you're at home, when you're not out there in the world, when you're not surrounded by people. That's when you're going to be on best form. And I think you also have to be careful about your various relationships, because there is today an opposition aspect between the Moon and Mercury. From a Capricorn perspective, the Moon obviously rules Cancer, your opposite sign. So if you've got Moon opposition Mercury, that might symbolize an argumentative person. So if you're close to someone, or you've had a partnership with someone, and in the past there have been arguments and there have been disagreements, then today you should probably stay out of their way, because there really could be arguments and disagreements. Even if there haven't been arguments and disagreements in the past, the Moon opposition Mercury is going to make another person more argumentative than usual, certainly more wordy than usual. They might have a lot to say, and then perhaps you are going to have a lot to say, and when two people have a lot to say, then it's only a matter of time before one word clashes into another word, and another word clashes into another word and another word, and then we get some critical reaction, and we could get some kind of verbal explosion, and that's really not something we want. So Capricorn, overall, I would say a bit of humility and modesty could be important today, especially in terms of your ideas and what you believe to be the case. And I don't think you should feel pressurized to adopt a super public role. I don't think that's important, at least not particularly important. A bit of isolation might be a very good thing. Aquarius. It's a day when you certainly think that you know the answers. I mean, like Capricorn, I've just been talking about Capricorn, and Capricorn is ruled by Saturn, and you, Aquarius, your sign is also ruled by Saturn. And so there are certain things in common between Aquarius and Capricorn, and very often they can experience the same thing at the same time. And Aquarius, if you've been listening to what I've been saying about Capricorn, I was advising Capricorn that they shouldn't be too confident in terms of their beliefs, especially when it comes to pushing those beliefs onto other people. You do need to consider the possibility that maybe you have got something wrong. Not everything wrong, but there's just a few areas that you just need to go over it again. And that's a very good thing to be doing today. Because today we have this opposition between the Moon and Mercury. And Mercury is in Aries. And Mercury is in a part of your chart that relates to, well, short distance traveling. And it also relates to the facts. And so with Mercury in Aries in this house, technically the third house, from the third house from Aquarius, because Aquarius is the first house, Pisces is the second house, Aries is the third house. From that perspective, there are things you should try to find out about. There are many ways of finding out about it. It may be about phone calls. It may be about looking things up on the internet. It may be about short distance traveling. Just maybe walking 50 yards, 50 meters. You may find out what you need to know. Maybe you're making assumptions about your own neighborhood. You're wondering what is happening 50 yards from where you live. Well, why continue wondering? You can just go out and look, and then you will have the answers. So the answers are all there, and I think it's important to get to grips with the answers, because if you don't find out the answers, then you might drift off in a direction that you really weren't planning on doing. You might start to get not just ideas about things, but whole philosophies and beliefs about things which are based on a false premise. In fact, it's quite possible that some of your existing beliefs are based on a couple of false premises. And today you might have to confront that. And with the Moon opposition Mercury, it is possible that when you are in discussion with someone, you actually realize that you're being told that you're wrong. I mean, you don't want to admit that you're wrong, but through conversation, through discussion, through argument, you start to see your own false assumptions. And now, in that situation, it's tempting to get annoyed, get angry. But really, you should see it as something good. If you find out that you've got something wrong, well, you should just accept it, check it, and then start to reevaluate your position. And that is the way to go about it. And indeed, if you try to push an argument today, I think that you may actually find that this happens. And I think that you're going to want to win arguments today, but you have to accept that today, if you get involved in an argument, there is a good chance you might lose that argument. And maybe that's a good thing. Pisces, you don't want to take things too seriously. I think there is a temptation, Pisces, that you would take certain things too seriously. You think that something is really important. And at the same time, you might exaggerate the impact you are having. And this may apply to things you've done in the recent past, that you're concerned you got something wrong, or that you embarrassed yourself. You may be obsessing about it a bit, but honestly, I don't think anyone has noticed. So don't get too obsessed about it. Don't get too emotional. I know that Pisces is an emotional sign. That's how Pisces works best, when Pisces does get emotional. But today, I think if possible, you should tone that emotion down a bit, because the emotional way of working is possibly not going to work too well. It's because the moon is conjunct the South Node, and the moon is opposition Mercury, and so if you take everything very seriously, and you get into deep emotions, and you get into your feelings, that could trip you up. It could cause you to make a mistake, to reach a conclusion that is fundamentally wrong. So that's the first point. Second point is that if you are too obsessed with your own feelings, and if you start to take your own feelings too seriously, then that's going to have an impact on other people. This moon opposition Mercury. Mercury rules Virgo. Virgo is your opposite sign. So too much emotion is going to be quite disruptive, and instead you need to focus on things that are real, things that are right in front of you, things that can be pointed to. Just vague feelings in themselves mean nothing. These vague feelings, they might feel strong and significant, but they're not. Just focus. Focus on what is right in front of you, and that is the way to go about doing it. If you can't see it, then maybe you don't need to discuss it. Or perhaps if you can't touch it, there's no need to discuss it. You can leave those complications for later. And really, Pisces, that's probably the only thing to say. I think I should also, I suppose, point out that you can be something of an authority figure if you want to be, but you have to understand that your area of authority is limited. I think that Pisces does want to be in control. I mean, for the last year, Saturn has been moving through your sign. But today, that area of control needs to be absolutely limited to your area of expertise. When you're on that ground, when you're on your ground, your area of expertise, for sure, you can really become a real authority figure, and people will listen to you. But if you try to be an authority figure in an area that is not part of your expertise, then you would make a fool of yourself. That's the astrology for the 12 signs. And now I'm going to look at things from the perspective of the I Ching. And so I ask the question, what is Tuesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching segment of this video? And the first hexagram I got was the joyous. Nice hexagram. The symbolism here is one lake over another lake. the idea of mixing with people, having fun, being content, everything is looking great. But there is a view that it's very important that we stand up straight as a symbol. What we mustn't do is be so caught up with a sort of joyous, somewhat complacent attitude generally around us that we lose our bearing. And because if we don't stand up straight, that means sort of standing up for something, being in a position perhaps to resist the water, the lake. You've got two lakes. We don't want to be overwhelmed by it. And I think that is there is a certain danger there. And the bottom line of the joyous does move. Now, this bottom line is fine. It's about feeling quietly comfortable. We don't need to be surrounded by people to feel comfortable. We just are comfortable. We can enjoy ourselves in a low-profile way and think that everything is okay. Of course, it's not true that everything is okay. And this is suggested by the second hexagram, because this line moves, and it moves to oppression. So joyous moves to oppression. The symbolism is, there's our lake at the top, but now we've got the abyss. It's like there's a hole in the lake, all the water is flooding out. So there is oppression. We feel that we're in danger of being overwhelmed, but I don't think we are going to be overwhelmed. All it means is that things have started to become difficult. We are going to make it. That's really important. We are going to make it. We just have to be strong within ourselves. That matters. We have to hold to what is true, hold what we believe in. We shouldn't be talking too much. We should just get on with it. And this burden is going to be with us. There is going to be a burden, but we have the capacity to carry this burden. Don't worry. Okay, I'm not necessarily talking about a literal burden. Obviously, I'm not encouraging you to carry too much, literally. But we have the capacity to do it, and we just have to bear with it and tell ourselves that we are strong enough to get through. So that is the day. So I think the day might start off okay, feeling comfortable, feeling that everything is fine, that the environment feels itself to be fairly harmonious. But as the day progresses, we might become aware that actually things are more difficult than we had imagined, and that there are responsibilities, and we may not get the support we were hoping for. Maybe we start with the joyous to begin with. Maybe we get promises. People tell us they're going to support us. We may feel that we're part of something big and wonderful. And then at some stage we realize actually we're on our own and we have to carry the burden ourselves. But as I said, it'll be okay. We'll be able to get through. And there is a promise here, or at least a suggestion, that things are actually going to improve. And maybe that relates to tomorrow. So what I'm going to do now is look at Russia. And I do this with a certain amount of wariness. because it's a controversial topic, isn't it? And even timings can be controversial. For example, I looked at Wikipedia, both the English and Russian versions, using Google Translate. They said that this flag got raised at 7:35 p.m., but I've seen earlier figures. I've seen, I think, 7:20. I've seen 7:45. So there are going to be arguments about what precise time that flag was raised, when the tricolour was put up and the hammer and sickle was taken down. So there will be arguments about that. So I wanted to, start off by looking at the chart that I have for Russia. This is a chart, December the 25th, 1991. I've gone for 7:35. I absolutely understand that some people are going to disagree with that. They may say it's 7:45. They may say it's 7:19. But whatever happens, we've got Leo rising. This chart is quite interesting in the sense that it has got everything below the horizon. I suppose that's going to happen when you have something that takes place at night. And this might indicate underestimation. The country is coming into being in the darkness. We've got sort of the moon in Virgo, got Sun in Capricorn, Pluto relatively close to the IC. And this gives me a sense that maybe this is a country that is underestimated. And perhaps people aren't aware of the strengths in this chart. And there is a crucial strength in this chart. And that is the fact that the Sun and the Moon are in exact trine with each other. So at that time, the Moon was at 3:7 Virgo, the Sun was at 3:25 Capricorn. So regardless of what the exact time that those flags were replaced, Leo was still rising. The Moon was still making an exact trine to the Sun. And Sun trine Moon gives great resilience. It's about something being able to survive. There's great harmony there. And maybe that is underestimated. Another point about this chart is the fact that Jupiter seems weak. Jupiter in Virgo. You might say Jupiter in Virgo says everything about the problems of Russia. Certainly in the 90s. The standard sort of stereotype of Russia in the 90s, that everyone was just concerned about money, oligarchs were taking what they could, and this was the way it was. Jupiter in Virgo. Jupiter just doesn't work very well in Virgo. Jupiter rules Pisces. And so Jupiter in Virgo, I suppose Jupiter in Virgo knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. And you could say that about Russia. But there is a saving grace here, and the fact that Jupiter is in mutual reception to Mercury. So there is Mercury in Sagittarius. Mercury is in its detriment in Sagittarius. Mercury doesn't work very well in Sagittarius, making this square to Jupiter in Virgo. But these two planets are in mutual reception. And I think that is a big deal, because it gives them dignity. in the end. And so that Jupiter, such a materialistic Jupiter, really materialistic, isn't it? Jupiter in the second house, but yeah, in mutual reception to Mercury. And I think that, as I said, I think that does make all the difference. And I suppose we also have to say that this country is a Capricorn. Capricorns, they do start slowly, and they are often underestimated. And I suppose in terms of wars, that's a kind of a Russian thing, isn't it? Russia very often starts its wars really badly, catastrophically often. When you think of Operation Barbarossa, and when the Germans invaded Russia, it was a disaster for the Russians. When the French invaded Russia, when the Russians invade Finland, that war with Russia had with Finland, it's often, everyone seems to think that the Finns beat the Russians. Of course, if you actually see it through as a longer war, actually the Russians won in the end. And I suppose you could say the same that's going on in Ukraine. And that Ukraine war, I think we are perhaps seeing this war, Russia behaving in quite a Sun in Capricorn way. The beginning of the war was a disaster, but then standard Russian form, if they weren't completely overwhelmed, they weren't completely defeated, they kept moving on, and now it's clear that Russia is winning its war. And maybe that's Sun in Capricorn, and that Sun in Capricorn trine the Sun in the Moon in Virgo trining the Sun in Capricorn. And one thing about this chart that we're perhaps thinking about, well, what about Vladimir Putin? How does Vladimir Putin link with this chart? Now, Vladimir Putin's chart, I know some people say that they've got a time of birth for him, but from what I can see, we do not have a time of birth for Vladimir Putin. And so it's very difficult to know what's happening. And Vladimir Putin's chart is not a chart that I particularly relate to. And the link between Vladimir Putin's chart and Russia's chart is not amazing. Vladimir Putin has his Mars at 26 Sagittarius, approximately. Again, I'm just taking a noon time for Vladimir Putin. So you could say that Vladimir Putin has his Mars trine the ascendant, and also widely conjunct Russia's Mars. So Russia's Mars is, of course, be its armed forces, and it's got in its own chart Mars trine the ascendant. It's the whole way the country asserts itself. So perhaps with Putin having his Mars on Russia's Mars, at some level he will be able to allow Russia in the end to assert itself, and with Putin's Mars trine Russia's ascendant. Now, if we take this time of birth for Russia when the flags were changed to be 735, then it is true that Putin's Pluto is conjunct Russia's ascendant. And Pluto is about transformation. And you could say this is what has happened. Russia had a particular trajectory through the 90s of, I suppose, being westernized, but not in a very constructive way. The worst aspects of capitalism we saw in the 1990s, I think, in Russia, with oligarchs, stealing of state assets, and Russia seemed to be going nowhere. And then you had the Ruble crisis in 1998. Then Yeltsin resigned end of 1999, and Putin became president in 2000. And so his Pluto is conjunct Russia's ascendant. and it's trine Russia's Mars. And so maybe we can see that Putin has had a quite dramatic and transformatory impact on Russia. And I know that in the West, everyone regards Putin as being a monster, but I think we shouldn't make this so personal. I've argued this before in a previous video. We do take it personally, but really, if Putin hadn't have been born, probably Putin would have turned up when there would have been another Putin, probably. I'm not really into this idea of personalities having such a big impact on history. Now, going back to the Russia chart, I wanted to consider one event which was catastrophic for Russia, and that was the Ruble crisis in 1998. The Ruble crisis was when the ruble got dramatically devalued. I think that Russia had to default on its loans, and it caused shockwaves around the world. And the peak of the Ruble crisis was on August the 17th, 1998. I don't know what date the Ruble crisis was. I don't know what time it was. I don't think the time is particularly relevant. It's just this was the moment of maximum crisis. I certainly remember it. People thought the whole banking system was going to collapse. And I think it was, at the time, long-term LTCM, long-term capital management. There was this hedge fund that had Nobel laureates involved in it, and it had these incredibly complicated algorithms, and it was supposedly absolutely foolproof. And I believe the Ruble crisis had some impact on long-term capital management collapsing. And it seemed, that the whole global banking system was on the verge in 1998. I don't know if you remember that. So, if the Russia chart for the changing of flags is relevant, then you would expect the Ruble crisis to show up on it. So at the time of a Ruble crisis, Saturn was at 338 Taurus. So here's Russia's chart in the middle, and with the midheaven at 725. So Saturn was reasonably close to the country's midheaven. Now remember what I said, that Russia has a trine between the sun and the moon. There is Russia's moon at 3 degrees 7 Virgo, and there is Russia's sun at 3 degrees 25 Capricorn. And so Saturn was trine Russia's sun and trine Russia's moon, pretty much exactly at the time of a Ruble crisis in 1998. Now, you could say, oh, well, that's a trine. Trines are a good aspect. You wouldn't have expected something bad to happen when there was a trine. Well, trines are not just good aspects. They are aspects. Furthermore, Saturn was exactly on the Sun-Moon midpoint, Russia's Sun-Moon midpoint. So there is the Moon, there is the Sun. The Sun-Moon midpoint would be 3 Scorpio. 3 Scorpio, by the way, is, I don't know whether it's relevant, but is the point of the Moon's maximum fall. But so Saturn was exactly on Russia's Sun-Moon midpoint, and that is when you had the Ruble crisis. And so I would argue that fits extremely well. And also note that the sun, if we take 7:35 p.m. as the time, and I'm sure people will argue with that, but if we say that at 7:35 Russia's ascendant was at 23:38 Leo, the sun was on that day was just crossing Russia's ascendant. And so I think the Ruble crisis does suggest that this is a chart that may actually work pretty well. Another event we might want to look at is the annexation of Crimea. You could argue that the annexation of Crimea in 2014, so remember in 2014 you had this, the Maidan revolt in Ukraine, which is this revolt that was very much organized by the United States. We think of Victoria Nuland, and the elected president was removed. He had to go, and I think it was essentially a pro-Western coup. And as a result of that, you had an effective civil war with people in Luhansk and Donetsk resisting it, and Russia annexed Crimea. I think that the Russians were certainly afraid of losing their naval base in Sevastopol, so that's when they annexed Crimea. So you would have expected the annexation of Crimea to figure in Russia's chart. I'm not saying it does, by the way, I'm just going to look at this chart anyway. So looking at Crimea, so this is a horoscope for the annex. I've gone for noon. I've set it for Sevastopol. These are the noon positions. I'm not saying I've got the time of the annexation. And I just wanted to see if this chart fitted at all with the annexation. And we certainly see some interesting stuff going on here, because Russia's Venus at the time that the flags changed was at 2254 Scorpio. And so Saturn was this Crimea, by the way, I've gone for March the 18th, 2014. So Saturn was conjunct Venus. So Saturn conjuncted Venus at the time of the Maidan revolt in Ukraine. So Venus in Scorpio was Russia's perhaps relationship with its neighbours, and just seeing with Saturn conjunct Venus that things were bad. There was a realization in Russia about how bad things were. And this Saturn, if we got the 7:35 p.m. time is correct, Saturn was exactly square Russia's Venus, Russia's ascendant. So Saturn was conjunct Russia's Venus, and Saturn was square Russia's ascendant. So this was a really difficult time for Russia, because there was a threat here that Ukraine was falling into the Western camp, and this realization about what was happening, plus the danger of losing Crimea and losing the idea that, what happened was that Ukraine leased Sevastopol to the Russians. So the Russians had a naval base in Crimea, but Ukraine controlled Crimea. And so this was a realization that their power was completely being threatened, and they could lose Ukraine to the Western camp. Ukraine would no longer be sort of neutral. And so perhaps that was Saturn conjunct Venus square the ascendant, and it was that, presumably, which triggered Russia's decision to annex Crimea. And I suppose you could say the rest is history. And finally, I suppose we need to look at the beginning of Russia's invasion of Ukraine on February the 24th, 2022, or as Russia would call it, the special military operation. And so here is a chart of the invasion. I don't know about the time. I set it for 4:55 a.m. in Kiev. But let's not worry too much about the time. So what I want to see is, does the chart for the invasion hit Russia's chart, the changing of flag chart? It kind of does. I wouldn't have said it was, absolutely dead on. Uranus, you can see, is fairly close to the midheaven, but it's not exactly on the midheaven. So Uranus on the midheaven you could say, well, that to an extent links up with doing something dramatic. Uranus is trine Jupiter, so that would be one way of looking at it. Saturn is at 18 Aquarius, so Saturn is moving towards the descendant. Saturn did not actually hit the descendant for a bit of time, so that wasn't exact, but I suppose you could say Saturn being in the sign of Russia's descendant suggests that this might be, broadly speaking, a time when Russia might be wanting to go to war. So that is a possibility. So yeah, I mean, I think the fit is okay, but I wouldn't have said that the fit. Oh, no, doesn't work. I thought was at 11. No, so the fit is okay, but it's not perfect. One other thing about the Crimea thing, which I think I forgot to mention with the Crimea annexation, is Pluto. At the time of the annexation of the Crimea, Pluto was at 1323 Capricorn. Uranus in Russia's chart is at 1319 Capricorn. So Pluto was exactly conjunct. Transiting Pluto was exactly conjunct Russia's Uranus when that happened, which kind of fits, doesn't it? This is a dramatic change. Pluto conjunct Uranus. Something has to be overturned. Russia's capacity to completely overthrow the international order has completely changed as a result of Pluto. Then there is the question of the Crocus attack and whether or not whether the Crocus attack links up at all with Russia's chart. I think the thing to notice about the Crocus attack is the moon. The moon was at 4 degrees Virgo. And so there we have Russia's chart. We have Russia's chart in the middle, the Crocus attack on the outside. The moon, when the attack happened, was at 4 degrees 35 Virgo. So it was conjunct Russia's moon. So it kind of had its lunar return. And it's fairly exact. Then you might be asking, well, so what? The moon will transit Russia's moon every couple of weeks. Sorry, every month. Every month it will make a conjunction. But then we have to consider the fact that there was a full moon. That was a March the 25th full moon, and the full moon just before that. So if we go back to the previous full moon from that, which was on, when was that full moon? That full moon was on, get it in a moment, it's on February the 24th. So going back to the Crocus attack and Russia, this attack happened just before a full moon. Yeah, you can see that. There's the moon. There's the sun. The moon is is moving up towards the full moon. So what about the previous full moon? Now there was a full moon on February the 25th. That full moon was at 5 degrees 23 Virgo. So that full moon, February the 25th, 5 degrees 23 Virgo, was very close to being on Russia's moon. So we should have seen that something was going to be happening to Russia with that full moon on Russia's moon. And then the moon triggers the full moon, which was at the end of February, and that's when we had the attack. That tells us not just that an attack, it doesn't just tell us about the attack. It tells us that this attack is really important. It's important, I think, for Russia and for how it conducts its war. I think that Russia's attitude to this war is going to completely change because of this attack. And that is because this attack links up with the full moon at the end of February, and that full moon links up with Russia itself because that full moon was on Russia's Virgo moon. Overall, I think that this chart for February the 25th, for December the 25th, for December the 25th, 1991 works extremely well. And I wanted to just finish by quickly looking at the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, sort of change tack a bit. And there was a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction on December the 21st, 2020. And my view, while we're on the subject of Russia, is that this conjunction represents Russian ascendancy. I wrote on my blog, I think at the beginning of 2021, about this conjunction. I took the view, there's a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. I've set this one for England. Let's reset it for Moscow. I set this conjunction for. I set the conjunction for. Yeah, this is set for Moscow. And the thing is that this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction is in Aquarius, and there is this association with Aquarius and Russia. Ptolemy talks about this association. When you divided up the known world, the area covered by Russia is, broadly speaking, about Aquarius. And with that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius, when I looked at it in the beginning of 2021, what I said was I thought this was the beginning of the Russian decade, that we were wrong to underestimate Russia. And I think that the fact we've got this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius just before Russia's invasion of the Ukraine seems to really fit that. And now we have got Pluto conjunct the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. Pluto's gone into Aquarius. It will briefly go back into Capricorn at the end of 2024. Briefly, then it will go back into Aquarius, and we're going to we will then see how this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction really works when Pluto really establishes itself in Aquarius. But I do feel that this conjunction is really what's driving people mad in the West. I think the conjunction represents a new world, a new way of being, and it is a great mutation conjunction. In other words, we've had a lot of Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions in Earth signs. Okay, we had it in an air sign in the early 1980s when we had the moon in. When we had a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Libra, but now it's all started. We've got solid Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions now in air signs. Some big change has actually happened now, and I think that is why people in the West, particularly the elites, are so terrified about Russia, are prepared to consider almost nuclear war, the way they absolutely desperate for Russia not to win. it's not really just about Russia. It is probably about the collapse of the West, the twilight of the West, and I think the elites really realize this, and I think that this would explain their panic and the fact that they will do anything, they will risk anything, in order not for Russia to win. And I think that they were influenced at a collective level by this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. It's not just, as I said, it's not just a fear of Russia, it's a fear of the East. And when we go back to the previous Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, which was at the beginning of Aquarius, the one before that, it would be, you have to go back quite a long time. You have to go back to 1226. So this was the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction on March the 12th, 2026 at 4:22. I don't know, 4:22 a.m. I've set this one for London. Let's just relocate it to Moscow. I mean, it doesn't really matter. But so this was the previous conjunction when Jupiter and Saturn were moving into Aquarius. And I think that maybe in the West there's a collective memory of this conjunction. So, what was going on at the time of, in Russia, 1226, in 1226. So it was the beginnings of a Mongol invasion. 3 years before this conjunction, on May the 31st, 1223, some Russian princes were defeated at the Battle of Kalka River. And the Battle of Kalka River took place, I think, just north of Mariupol, modern Mariupol. And so this conjunction, Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, represents a Mongol invasion. It represents the East. Now, then, 1226, it was about the Russians getting defeated, and 14 years later, in 1240, the Mongols captured Kiev. But I think in this case, remember, history doesn't repeat, it rhymes. And I think it is about 1226, a power from the East. So it's not just about Russia. Russia is just part of the East, perhaps Russia and China, and also the BRICS. It's over, and I think that it goes back to Jupiter-Saturn, but I think it'll be worse than 1226. The West was not destroyed by the Mongols in 1226. The Mongols got a long way into the West, into Western Europe. They got into Hungary and so forth, but they did stop at a certain point. But I think it echoes back to this conjunction in 1226, where everyone in the West in the 13th century was terrified of the Mongols, and that collective memory is perhaps starting to be stirred up when we see what's going on in Russia, with Russia beating Ukraine. Of course, the West is now terrified that Russia is going to keep going, going to invade Poland and the Baltic states. Of course, that is just nonsense, but it's still that collective fear in the West, and that might, to an extent, help us understand why people are so afraid in the West. I mean, it's completely irrational, but it's also the whole Western system is under threat. So just a thought about the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. It's so tempting. You see a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in 2020, you put a YouTube video about it, and the next week you're moving on to the next thing. But that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in 2020 is still with us. And I want to sort of look at that chart again in my videos, sort of flesh it out and try to understand more clearly what it's about. But it does remind us of the fact that it is kind of over for the West. By the way, I just wanted to finish with one quotation from Edgar Cayce. I'm not going to comment on this quotation. I'm just going to let you think about it. This was a quotation. This was Edgar Cayce. Remember, Edgar Cayce was a very famous psychic, and his readings were published, and his global predictions were published. And he said this on February the 8th, 1932. Just ponder on this. I'm not going to comment. On Russia's religious development will come the greater hope of the world. Then that one or group which is the closer in its relationships may fare the better in the gradual changes and final settlement of conditions as to the rule of the world. Greater hope of the world and religious development and Russia. I don't know. Any thoughts about that? Okay, that's it. I've probably gone on for far too long. And I hope you found that video useful. If you did, I would be grateful if you were to press the like button. If you're not subscribed, I would be, of course, very grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thanks again for listening, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.